Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome
Morning.
to this morning's webinar. Well done to everyone who's managed to find an outdoor space, but this should only be an hour at most of your precious sunshine time today. So I'm hopeful that most of you have managed to see a little video that was made last week about why we're doing this. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, I'm going to kind of go over it briefly. But I'm Samantha. Hi. I know quite a lot of you, and for those I don't, I prefer Samantha, but we won't stand on ceremony, so it's okay. So the reason that these have come about is that, for those of you who might know, Mountain Training commissioned some research with Bangor University, and the lovely Will Hardy ran some investigation into what it was that we could do as an organisation and you as providers in order to increase the success rate of candidates through the pathway. So he looked specifically at the Mountain Leader Award, but it's got the findings map onto all of the other schemes as well. So primarily what he found was that, and I'm going to read directly to you so we know exactly what the research said. So 2 key findings. So there's a huge document. He spent 4 years doing this, but what I love about research is it gets distilled down to us, the lay people, in 2 sentences. So firstly, candidates who passed their first assessment felt that their training course staff, that's you guys, displayed more coaching and supportive behaviours than those who did not pass first time. So there's something in there about at assessment, those who are more supportive in the training period, that's going to lead to a higher success rate. And secondly, specifically goal setting facilitated by the training course staff, again, you guys, is important for both getting to assessment and then passing. So what that all means then is the way that staff behave, so with the way providers and training staff behave at the training course has a massive impact on whether or not somebody will pass their assessment. Now, of course, there are lots of other factors. So, for example, people don't get to assessment because of changes in life situation, or I don't know, they change job, or they have other priorities, or whatever. But if somebody is dedicated to going through the pathway, what you do at training has a huge impact. And I know that you're already very good at this. One thing that the research was very keen to find out as we come here is that you were very good at this. So I just want to give you a little overview of why we're here today, and then I will get back to what we're going to do. So firstly, looking at why we're here and the evidence of the research. So that's kind of what we've said already. And then secondly, just to reassure you that this is about tweaking your current performance. You're already doing really well at these coaching behaviours. This is always just about CPD. How can we be doing better? How can we optimize that training opportunity? So perhaps there are things in here today that will make you feel super confident and just reassure you that you are totally on the right path. And maybe there are some things in here today that you think, perhaps I could try that, perhaps I could give that a go, perhaps I need to work on that element. So it's very much a personal interpretation of kind of a broad spectrum of things I'm going to give you. And then secondly, is trying to understand what feedback is about, why it's important, what it actually means, and how we do it. And you're giving feedback all of the time. Sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's through your body language, but you definitely are giving feedback. And so if we can make it the best possible feedback ever, then everybody will benefit from that. And as I reiterated, as I said at the beginning, I'll reiterate that now, questions are more than welcome. We're going for a mics on at the moment. So if you want to just kind of shout out, that would be great. Like I said, if it all gets a bit too busy and sounds like a pop concert, then we'll resort to using the chat function box, and I'll just keep my eye on that. Okay, so that's where we're at today. So looking at effective feedback then, what is the purpose of giving feedback? And I know you've been doing this, a lot of you, for a very long time, and in order to become a provider, you have to have all of the requisite skills, including the ability to give feedback in order to run these courses. So I'm not teaching you to suck eggs here at all. It's just making sure that we come from a point of clarity and that we're all sharing the same kind of definitions and understanding, okay? So the important part to remember is that effective feedback is part of not even remotely good enough to be a provider, your ability to coach your candidates to a state of competence. So you are the facilitator to their success. So what you do on the ground has an impact on whether or not they succeed. You're not the only factor, but you are a pretty important factor. Secondly, it's about appraising performance. And that's not just you giving your expert opinion, because you are expert in this case, but it's also encouraging them to self-appraise, because if they take ownership of their learning and their path forward, they are going to be much more committed to it. So like I say, you're a factor, but you're not the only factor. They have to be willing to buy in. But you can direct their performance as well. And this is where your expert input is really, really important, because you know what is expected of them. Whereas a lot of people going through the pathways don't actually know what assessment looks like. They don't know what the ideal gold standard looks like. And a lot of them may not until they actually get there. So if you can give them some expert input, if you can direct them in any way, then that is hugely valuable to them. But like I say, they need to take ownership of that. And we'll look more at that later. And the last thing is to try and develop confidence in the candidate's own ability. Now, part of this is a lot of the things that you can do. So giving them really clear feedback so that they understand what they can and perhaps not do. And also giving them the opportunity, like I say, to take ownership over their learning and how they're going to develop. Because if they have to do that, then they have to become more confident in it. So it's a really nice, self-fulfilling cycle where you give them support on the ground at training and give them some ideas of a pathway forward that they've agreed and shared into with you. And then that becomes a sort of a commitment they can then carry forward. Okay, so some of the things we have to consider then are the logistics. Now, effective feedback, if we look this up on the internet, you'll find loads of stuff to do with management and consultancy, because you know they're the only people who've got enough money to buy in people to make expensive models, but we can steal those, so that's fine. So things we have to consider are much more about the environmental considerations. So do we do hot reviews? So do we do it there and then? Do we take somebody aside and say, actually, I just need to stop you right there, or I just need to talk about what you just did, or we need to think about what's going on at the moment? Or do you save it up and do it later as a cold review? But then also those two words, hot and cold, we have to think about the state of us and the state of the group at the same time. So is it appropriate to give feedback in the environmental situation that you're in? The other things we have to think about in terms of logistics is we have to be really, really specific. Evidence shows that if we give super specific feedback, people are more likely to be able to A, work on it, and B, understand the context of it, and therefore do something about it. So we have to be super specific, and we'll look at that again. These are just kind of overview at the moment. We also have to make it relevant. So it's being able to give examples that fit to the current situation and future situations that will be the same. So it's in context and it relates to them, not just a general, the group is doing this. We also have to be factual, and this is one of the most important points. We are looking at behaviours, actions, and the consequences of those, not making it into a kind of personal opinion or a character assessment. Now, when we deliver feedback in any context, whether it's as a provider or not, people take it very personally because it is personal to them. So we want to work on our ability to make it personalized, but not personal. Okay. And also the logistics of, and each of you will have a different idea about this, but when you actually give a result. So on an assessment, some people I've spoken to are very keen on giving the result straight up front and then doing the feedback. Other people give a result, then give them time to go and think about it and then come back. Other people do the feedback and then give the result. So these are considerations that we just need to take into mind. Okay, so that's where we're at with effective feedback. And I'd just like to point out at this point, even though the research mentions goal setting in particular, it's really important that we deal with feedback first, because that is where they will draw the elements for their goal setting. So if goal setting is one of the main functions of them passing an assessment, whatever the assessment is, we have to make sure that we load them sufficiently with the information and confidence and understanding of competencies in order to get those goals set up properly. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense so far. Okay, so one of the key factors, as I said, is you are very important in this whole outcome. And therefore we need to think about what our influence is in this situation. So if the behaviours and the coaching skills of the training staff, i.e. you, are a huge factor in somebody passing their assessment, then we need to be able to make sure we understand what problems and antidotes we have to those things. So as I said, environmental factors are going to be a huge consideration, considering that the majority of the work that you're going to be doing is outdoors. And a lot of your feedback may well be given outdoors, even if your final briefing is given somewhere a little bit more comfortable. Okay, so we have to think about the time, the place, and the situation. When is it appropriate to give feedback? It's also really important to consider our personal opinion. And I'll come on to that, I think, in a slide or two, because that's really, really important. But also one of the main considerations is how you are feeling right then. Because for the majority of you, at the end of an assessment, or even during a training course, you are absolutely exhausted after giving your undivided attention, putting in lots of thought and effort into how you train, how you support, how you deliver feedback. So if it's not a good time for you to be giving feedback because of how you are feeling, and that may be an environmental thing, you may be absolutely freezing, or it's just time to get off the hill or whatever, but you need to consider whether or not you are in the right space to give that feedback. So some of the antidotes to that, then, we can actually just remember that we are human too and we have needs. So just breathe, take some time for yourself. Although you are doing a job here and it's very, very important, you can only do your job as well as how you are functioning. So you must take a moment just to make sure you're in the right space and ask yourself the questions: am I in the right time, place and situation in order to give this feedback, or are there other factors going on here? And these might sound like really simple things. And for those of you who've been doing this a long time, these are the things you will be doing intuitively, automatically. But that's great. I'm just trying to draw your awareness to it so you remind yourself of what's important. The other thing that might be useful is oh, hello, please do.
Sorry, Mike Reynolds has got his hand up. I was just wondering.
Oh, hi.
Mike, did you want to unmute yourself? Did you have something to ask? Let me unmute you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't see hands. So if you want to ask a question, you either shout out or you'll have to type it in the chat box and I'll stop.
Oh, I see.
Well spotted, Nick. Go for it, Mike.
Oh, sorry, Mike.
Wait a minute, we've got a sound problem.
We've got a unmute issue. Sorry, Mike. There we go.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah, there we go. Mike, you're on. Go for it.
Yes. No, I agree with all you're saying, really. I just had one or two small examples that might be useful, particularly looking back in the past many years when I had some a very troublesome assessment, which was pretty damaging, really. So I learned from that to, particularly as everybody's very sensitive. So when I'm on a training course or on an assessment course, I do my best to give very positive praise, really, because I don't think anyone really does badly or deliberately does badly. So that I respect where they're coming from, that they're a genuine person, they're sincerely on the course, and then I might say it would have been even better if, as a way of saying, it would have been even better if your rope handling had been, much more reliable, or whatever it was, or your runner placement, was more reliable. Because if you get very negative feedback, I think that's also personally not good, and can be very damaging to people. So that's just one or two things from where I'm coming from, I suppose, which Perfect. I think you're saying anyway.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Mike. And And I think this is really important, that we understand that, although, I mean, the ideal thing would be we'd all be sitting in front of each other today and, you know, there'd be a massive biscuits to share. But in this situation, it's really important that we understand there's a whole field of expertise out there, and we can share our examples and experiences in order to promote experience within the group. And you're exactly right, Mike. We have to remember that not only are we human and we need to consider our situation, but people do take this very, very personally. So anything we can do, not to dress it up, but anything we can do to take off the edge so that we speak to them with, and this is very Samantha statement, speak to them with kindness. We can still say things that are constructive. We can still deliver, in inverted commas, bad news, but you can deliver it in a kind way. And praise is a huge part of that. And actually, we'll talk right at the very end about how the leadership behaviours that include things like praise are really important for us to remember during this period. So yeah, great input there, Mike. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so thinking about those things then, how we're delivering information, and if we're going to do it in the kindest way possible, as Mike is saying, we need to make sure that we're situated correctly. So that means being able to breathe, take a moment. Is this the right time? Have I got the words formed in my head, or am I just a little bit hot under the collar, a little bit tired, a little bit annoyed by this person? Because let's face it, some of them are really annoying. I know I'm annoying. And maybe in that situation, maybe we have to think about things like making what I might loosely term an appointment. So we say, okay, right, I need to talk to you about, let's use Mike's example, your rope handling. But I think it's probably best done when you've had a reflection on it and I've thought about what perhaps we need to discuss. So as soon as we get back, or once we're in the minibus, I'll get everyone to sort the kit out. I just want 2 minutes with you then. Is that okay? And it doesn't have to be anything official. It might take longer than 2 minutes, but at least you're giving them a heads up, so there are no surprises about what you're going to say, but equally so that you're better positioned to be able to do it kindly. And the important thing is to stick to the facts. What have you observed, and what does that mean? It's not how you feel about it. It's not how you feel about the person. It's what have you observed, and what does that mean? So if their rope handling has not been as good as it could have been, what are the facts of that? So what bits didn't they do correctly? And what impact would that have? Well, ultimately, the impact would be you wouldn't pass your assessment with this, but how can we deliver that message kindly? So things that we might want to consider in terms of rope handling are X, Y, and Z, because that is what the criteria expects of you. And if you always refer back to the fact that this is basically a scientific calculation of your abilities, it's not a personal interpretation of whether you are a good person, because that unfortunately is how feedback is often interpreted. Sticking to the facts, giving it that kind of, what have I observed? What does it mean? This is what the criteria expects. That's a really lovely process for you to be able to stick to, especially if you're finding them a difficult character or they're making lots of mistakes. And if in doubt, make notes as you go along. I'm sure there are lots of pen and paper users, but I'm sure there are also lots of people who keep notes on their phone. If now is not the time to be discussing it, and there are many reasons why that might be, particularly in the environments we work in, but just make some notes, just things so that you remember the facts rather than, oh God, I was going to talk to them about something. They were really annoying me about that. Yes, and it becomes personal then rather than the facts. So if you have got some facts, write them down. And then of course that will really help you with your written report at the end, because nobody likes to have to do those cold right at the end of the week or the end of the course. So make your life easy. Okay, so coming on to that, people are really annoying. So our prime consideration in the outdoors, as we all know, is safety first. And this little model here is something I teach in other formats, but it's always to do with the fact that we have to make sure that the safety stuff is tied up first. So the things like runner placements, navigation, ability to, move over steep ground, rope handling, that kind of thing. But we also have to think about their behaviours, because if we are handing out, if you are handing out leadership awards, is safety the only thing they're good at? Because yes, they have to be safe, but what about if they have absolutely no concept of creating a positive environment for other people? And I'm sure that some of you have had those situations where you've met somebody who technically is very sound, but actually they really haven't got a clue about how to look after their group. They perhaps don't share information. Perhaps it's just about control. Perhaps it's just about, I'm going to take you out for the day and we're just going to do this. There's no interaction. There's no extra effort. There's none of that sort of coaching type stuff that you're role modeling. So let's be honest, some humans are not that easy to get on with, and we all have different personalities. So this is Samantha's very simple flow diagram. So all we need to concern ourselves with, is there an immediate or pending safety concern? And that is your primary question. It's the question that's always buzzing around in your head. Since you've been working in the outdoors, this is all that goes on inside your subconscious, probably even at night. I know I do it even in the home, and it drives people crackers. And if the answer to that is yes, then that is the thing that you need to focus on. That is the thing that you need to fix. That is where they need feedback, because they will not pass any assessment if they don't do the safety bit. And the safety bit will be things like navigation or micronav or rope handling or tying knots, things like that. So if there is an immediate, or you can see it's about to happen, safety concern, then yes, that's where the feedback needs to be focused. And then once it's been delivered, once you've seen them improve, or once they've had their feedback and they can go away and consolidate, great, go back to the question. But if safety is neatly tied up, if they are demonstrating adequate, or sufficient, or even excellent ability in all the safety and technical stuff, then you have to think about the behaviours, because it is not just about being able to tie knots and read a map and things like that. It is about the way that you interact with people. And it's, no spoiler alert, but soon there will be an expectation in assessment that people are able to sign up to the leadership behaviours about being supportive, encouraging, potentially stimulating, challenging, yet not too challenging type of leader, as well as being able to make it safe, because that is what gets more out of people. So it is important that we look at their behavior, not necessarily their character, but their behavior on the ground. And maybe that's where there needs to be some feedback as well. And that can be really difficult, because we feel that if we start talking about something that's not just technical, it's a little bit of grey ground. And I understand that people might feel a little less comfortable about delivering that kind of feedback. The important thing is that anything that's on assessment will have criteria to match it. And if there is anything changing in any of the syllabi or syllabuses, feel free to quarrel over whether it's syllabi or syllabuses. This is an ongoing discussion. But if there is anything that is changing in the criteria, you will be told about that. There will be training, there will be CPD. So by the time you have to worry about those types of conversations that perhaps are more behavioural than technical, you will be fully equipped for that. Okay, so I just want to reassure you on that front. Okay, so we have to give, in all walks of life, positive and negative feedback. Now, I'm really good at dressing up a good, I would always write something like positive and areas to work on, but I think we have to call the facts as they are. We have positive and we have negative feedback, and that's how it will be interpreted. It doesn't matter how you dress it up, somebody knows when they've done something wrong. So we have to look at things like, is it appropriate to deliver the positive and or negative feedback just individually or to the group as a whole? And that might seem like a strange consideration, because I imagine most of you give feedback one-to-one, but sometimes there are points of positive and negative that are common to everybody, and it could be that they could work, especially on a training course, a little bit more collaboratively to try and understand what it is they're getting wrong, and especially if there's something positive. So Mike mentioned praise earlier. Oh, I am the queen of praise, love a bit of praise. If you're just breathing and walking, you can get praise for that by me. Praise everything that is good. And if that means doing it individually and in a group, then even better, because everybody shares in that glow. And we never give false praise. We never use praise that is just a sort of tokenistic sweetener. So we don't just say things like, yeah, you're doing great, because nobody can do anything with that information. We have to give examples, like as Mike was giving earlier. So if we praise somebody or we praise the group, we have to say, okay, well done everybody for doing X, Y, and Z today. Or I like the way you're all working together to share ideas and help train each other up. It's really good to understand that everybody's there to help each other. So well done on that. Yeah. And sometimes doing it in a group really is going to boost that collaborative effort, which is important on a training course, because as they go forward, potentially they want to meet up with those people and can do their consolidation. It's important to have ally. So that's really important for us to remember. And the key thing about praise is it builds confidence. If it's specific and if it's genuine, it builds confidence. And if we go back to the beginning of the presentation, part of what you're doing as a training on your training courses is to coach them to competence by building some of their confidence. So for those of you who perhaps are thinking, I'm really feeling comfortable with this whole presentation, I know that I'm getting most of this right, I'm just going to have a little think about this, tweak my performance, then fantastic. This is about reassurance. But for those of you who are perhaps looking to do things differently, or maybe you want to try other things, I would suggest perhaps going to the internet and having a look at some of the models that are out there to help structure feedback, especially if you've had perhaps a negative experience and it's kind of put you off a little bit, or maybe it's kind of made you a little bit unsure of what to do next. So I spoke to a provider many years ago, and I've spoken to many since who've given me the same story. And one of the worst experiences they had was at assessment, right at the end of the week, after giving feedback throughout, speaking to someone who clearly was not going to pass and saying, "How do you think you've got on this week?" And the individual then turning around and saying, "I think I've done really well, actually. It's been great." And that's a really difficult pen to get out of then, isn't it? You're kind of pinned into a corner. So thinking about how you might be able to structure things differently and having a structure to go to might help you in those moments where you think, oh God, I've just made a mistake. I shouldn't have said that to them, or I should have phrased that differently because now they're going to think that that's okay, or whatever, because we're only human and sometimes we make mistakes. So some of the models I'm suggesting here, and there are millions more, I just didn't want to overwhelm you. And one thing that I've done is put some resources together, which will be available somewhere. I'm sure it'll be, yeah. Nicola's nodding furiously. So yeah, they will be available. I'm just not really the technician behind that. So it will be very clear for you when an email goes out and says where all these resources are. So you can just look at some picture diagrams, you can read some more information, you can go and find some websites. So some of the models I've put up are things like Kolb's learning cycle. So, you know, for the layperson, this is just the plan, do, review, apply. And this is a really nice way for you to help set up that taking ownership with your candidate. So I'm going to help you do the review bit by giving you some feedback, but then I want you to tell me what your plan is for next time. What would you do differently next time? Right now, go and show me. Now let's review together. Now let's apply those changes. Now let's do it again. Yeah. And if you get into that practice, and I'm absolutely sure because I've seen it time and time again from instructors, you're already doing this, but it's making you aware so that you can use it as a tool to help them. Because if you're doing plan, do, review, apply with them, but you explain that that's what you're doing, that's also then a structure for them to go away and apply to their own goal setting and consolidation. So there's the Kolb model up there. Then there's something called CEDAR, and I've got another little slide on another page, and you don't worry too much about making notes and stuff. I'm going to send you in the direction of some really pretty diagrams, because God knows a picture's much better, isn't it? And then just skip the next one for a second. And then another thing I think is interesting to talk about is growth and fixed mindset. So this is Dweck is the person responsible for that, and I'll come on to that briefly in a minute. But the one thing I want to point out is, so I work a lot with younger people, mainly because adults are essentially flawed, and I just love the hope and optimism of young people. And one thing they tell me is whenever I give them praise, they stand there looking at me, waiting. And I've asked many groups over the years, what is it you're waiting for? And they said, we're waiting for the bad bit, the sting in the tail. And then we're waiting for you to cover it over with some more praise. And I was like, okay, well, let me tell you, there's no sting. I just wanted to say, well done for doing this. When you've done something not right, then I will tell you you've done something not right. So here's an example of something that didn't go well this morning. What are we going to do about it? What can you do? How can I help you? Great, that's it. No pause necessary. So I would really urge you to steer clear of the good, bad, good, which was very much a 1990s kind of way of doing things, when we all had those really like horrible furry fleecy jackets. Remember the really old school ones that were, you could melt them if you went near a flame. And it was very popular at that time, but it doesn't help, because all they hear is the bad bit, because they assume that the rest of it is just dressing up the bad. So please try and steer away from that. And in order to reassure people, I actually say to them, right, I've got good and I've got bad. Which way round do you want it? There's no dressing it up. And it leaves it open for them. It's otherwise known as the poo sandwich, which I think is a beautiful analogy, but we'll just stick with the good, bad, good. Okay, so there's some examples of things that we could use to help us in structuring and letting your students know about these models potentially, or directing them, giving them a little sheet of paper with some or an email with some potential websites on, might help them in their goal setting, which, if we remember, is the purpose of trying to give them some help here. Okay, so a couple of models then. So CEDAR, and who doesn't love a good acronym, is talking about the context, examples, diagnosis, action, review. So in brief, because there will be more information about this that I'll send, and you can go and look at it. I just don't want to labor on something that might not be relevant for everybody. So context, thinking about, is it specific to them? Is it relevant to the situation? Are you looking at something that is perhaps a niggle or a pet hate on your part, but doesn't actually impact on the criteria and assessment? Yeah. So think about the context that you're giving it to them, and explain why you are telling them about this. So the reason, so let's look at your rope work. Rope work is incredibly important for the criteria. There are X number of things that we have to get right. So that's the context. Here's some examples of the things that you have done, some right and some not. And remember, this is for the criteria. And so the diagnosis then is, what led you to do it this way? What else, what else is there that's impacting on your perhaps ability to reach that criteria? So it's the sort of underpinning, why are we getting this wrong? And then the action is simply that whole plan, do, review. What are we going to do about it? How can I support you? What do you need to do? Is it just a case of practice? Is the knot just a bit tricky because you don't use it very often? Is the navigation just because you've had a few months off and you haven't been doing it, so you just need more practice? And then the review is getting them to go through, okay, so what is the issue here? Why is that important? I.e., what impact does that have? Essentially not meeting criteria. Why is it going wrong in the first place? So that we can speak out about the things, the mistakes, and then make them better. And so we're aware of them so we don't make them again. And then what can we do about it? Okay, so it's a kind of more fancy kind of corporate version of plan, do, review, apply, but it allows you to be really specific about certain parts of the feedback. The other thing I wanted to bring up was fixed and growth mindset. So two things I'll say about this. I know some of you will be very familiar with this, some of you won't be, but again, don't worry too much about the nitty gritty. We're just looking at sort of simplicity for now. But the two things I'll say about it, firstly, you don't just have a fixed or a growth mindset. It's not a case of, see that person there, they are black, white, negative, positive. They are fixed and growth mindset. So for example, I have a growth mindset about most things. I'm just one of those really annoying, positive outlook. We can do anything if we put our minds to it type of person. But I have an absolute fixed mindset about going down caves, barky dogs, and spiders that are bigger than your hand. I'm not interested in developing my ability to deal with those things. So I have a fixed mindset about those. So the first thing is, we're not just black or white. Secondly, we can adapt to these things. So if I had a fixed mindset and I was given the appropriate coaching at the time when I did have to go down a cave, then perhaps I would be able to be encouraged into a growth mindset and be able to develop thereafter. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. But essentially, there are a number of things that we can sort of measure fixed and growth mindset about. So if you suspect that somebody has a little bit of a fixed mindset about an ability to tie a knot, an ability to, I don't know, walk on a bearing, or an ability to take control of the group, then perhaps you can narrow it down rather than just say, okay, I see that you're struggling to give instructions to the group. Why do you think that might be? That's a really difficult thing to unpack. It's quite a big subject. So perhaps we can break it down into small things, in smaller sections. So in fixed and growth mindset, we have these markers. So what are the challenges here? Are you avoiding the challenge? So are you not actively using the not that you can't do very well? Because if you're not, perhaps we need to look at how we can encourage you to start integrating that. Yeah. Secondly, the obstacles. If you fail, do you just give up? Do you just say, I'm never going to get the hang of this, this is fruitless, I'm just not going to bother doing it? Because if that's the case, then we need to look at how we develop that fixed mindset into something a bit more positive, because let's face it, you have to be able to do this for the criteria. How much effort are they putting in? So if they're being taught something new, potentially they might find it boring or too difficult, or they already think they're good at it. So it's having a look at the level of effort as well. And if they're refusing to make the effort, then that tells you this is very much fixed as well. And how do they respond to, and I've written criticism here, but we could easily write negative feedback. How do they respond to that? And a lot of how they respond to that is, as we said at the beginning, how you deliver it. But it's also about whether or not they're willing to hear something negative. Because a lot of people, and forgive me if you're familiar with this, but a lot of people, if they get something wrong, they pretend that they don't, or it's not important in the first place, and they're a bit, let's say, bolshy about it. So it's important to kind of recognize that. And then how do they deal with the success of others? So you have two types of people: either, oh, that's really good for them, a little bit jealous, but that's really good for them, or I hate them with all my fury, how can they get that right? Well, they're probably cheating, or they're favored, or whatever. And that's a very different mindset to somebody who's like, oh, I really want to get the hang of that. It's very inspiring to see you demonstrate how to do it correctly, but I just need some help. So sometimes this can help you right at the beginning to recognize what you're facing in terms of people's mindset and how much work you've got on your hands, and actually showing somebody who is in the stages of fixed or growth mindset a little picture diagram of, this is kind of something I want you to look at, can be quite powerful. So again, I'm not telling you to use these models. I'm just kind of introducing things to sort of perhaps expand your toolbox, because remember, you're already really good at this. This is just about refining practice. Okay. So that's some more stuff about growth mindset, but I'm going to put it in. It's all in the documents that add to resources. So I'm going to skip that bit. Okay, so the key points, because I'm really aware that we want to have some time for questions and discussion. Key points are the purpose of the feedback. Why are you telling them what you're telling them? Does it function to help them pass their assessment or to develop, over time? Or is there some more personal motivation? So think about the purpose primarily. And then most importantly, we're going to aim for no surprises. So you don't end up in that situation at the end of the week where you say, how do you think you've got on? And they say, oh yeah, I've had a great time, it's been brilliant. And actually it's a little bit of a car wreck. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're giving feedback throughout, because we are coaching to competence. So that means delivering feedback consistently and throughout performance, not just a summary at the end. It's not an exam. Yeah. Consider the time, the place, and your and their mood. And think about, maybe I need to make a, inverted commas, appointment to talk to them about this later, but I'm going to make a note of that. And that gives you then time to consider and prioritize your feedback. So they really riled me up doing this, or when are they ever going to learn this? And that can become a sort of a personal niggle. Is that the thing you need to talk to them about, or is it a behavioural thing? Is it a technical thing or a behavioural thing? So it gives you space and time to reflect on what's important. And primarily, we're describing behaviours and their impact here. So it's not a case of you can't tie that knot because you're useless. It's you can't tie that knot because you either haven't practiced it properly, it's never been demonstrated properly to you, or you don't understand why and how it functions and why it's important in a certain situation. Yeah, I've never got. Sorry, go on, Mike.
They might have a fear of knots.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you have a big spiders, they might have a fear of knots.
Absolutely, because to get a knot wrong has a huge consequence, doesn't it? And so there might be a huge thing about being under pressure, even on a training course, and saying, I just can't get this right. I mean, personally, I've never got the hang of the beautiful alpine butterfly because I just don't practice it enough. But I was taught it well, and I was taught why it was important. So it's really easy for somebody who might be, let's say you had an assessment on that, it would be really easy for someone to help me get over that, because I already understand all of the bits about why it's important. The feedback that was delivered to me was really good. because it was, this is why it's important, Samantha. This is how you do it. This is how it works and what its function is. Now go away and practice. Yeah. And as Mike said ages ago, such a good point, keep it positive, always offering them a way forward. So it might not necessarily be a really friendly summary. It might be bad news, but what can they do about it? How can they move forward? Because all of that will feed into the last comment, action plan and reviewing, because that's where they get their goal setting from. And if you have delivered consistent feedback throughout, they've had no surprises, you've tried to do it in a space and time where you and they feel okay, and you've been able to point to specific behaviours and the impact, and you've been able to keep it perhaps positive, or at the very least being able to offer them a way forward, then they will be able to make successful goals, setting plans, and then go to their assessment feeling competent. Okay, so just a 1-minute summary of this. So the INSPIRE model, you'll have seen this everywhere because you basically can't brush past me without knowing about this. And I've made sure it's advertised all over the place. But these are the leadership behaviours, and they're behaviours. It's things that you can do and demonstrate. So like Mike was saying earlier, giving them praise, giving them constructive feedback. It's about setting the example you want to see. So role model. So let me demonstrate the perfect not. Let me demonstrate this. Let me give you some good feedback. So it's worth thinking about those things, and they may well form part of your criteria when you're looking at that. Remember the flow diagram, how are they behaving? This is a really good indicator to come back to and say, look, actually at no point have you engaged the rest of the group with what's going on here today. There's been no vision. You're not getting the group to join in, you're just telling them what to do. So there's nothing here about joint goals. The role modeling, you're asking them to do things, but you're not doing them yourself. For example, X, Y, Z. So this gives you a really easy model of being able to give behavioral feedback. And then one last thing. So this just came to me because, you know, I have nothing better to do with my time. And if you're struggling to get them or yourself to understand what it is behaviorally I'm expecting from them, because the technical stuff, like we said, is easy. You just, it's kind of, I match it up to this criteria, I tick it when it's been demonstrated. So what you're generally looking for is that a person being awarded a leadership qualification should be able to hear. So they need to demonstrate some ability to be humble, to be encouraging to other people, to show some empathy, i.e. they're taking on the needs of the people in their group, that they are appropriate in their role modeling, in their behavior, in the way they speak to people, in the way they deliver feedback. And they can also build some level of rapport, because I think that's one thing that we notice in perhaps a person who is very technically strong, but perhaps is failing in the group management issues. So that's just, I just made that up. It might be useful, but it just assumed, to me, it kind of assumed the role of what am I looking for as a ruddy reckoner? Okay, so there's me. Feel free to answer questions. I have nothing else to do with my time. I love answering questions. So feel free to email if you need some time to reflect. But I'm having a look here now, and it looks like I've got some questions on the group chat. So I'm just going to have a look. Will we be able to get copies of the slides? Yes. And there will be a recording of this, so you can look at it time and time again to see my sunny face. And somebody has written here, I think it's important what I'm saying. Thanks. Take the edge off, speak with kindness rather than just being super, super positive. Yeah. Yeah, some people have got toddler issues. I know it's very noisy for you in the background. Let's have a look. Regard to praising the good, putting in practice the information found about praising the effort versus praising the result. Yeah, that's such a key point. It's not just the result. It's not just well done, you did it. It's you're almost there. This is about practice, and that's the whole purpose of a training course, that you go away and consolidate. So what's the effort that you've put in? And you're right, that goes back to the fixed and growth mindset. If they are showing the effort, but they just need some technical assistance or practice, that needs to be praised. Yeah, so essentially feedback on the effort and actions rather than the outcome, because the outcome is the result of the effort and the actions that they put in, isn't it? You're dead right. So they need to know, and what's written here is allowing them to conclude the outcome or have an understanding of how they can affect the outcome. Yeah, that's so right. And if you deliver your feedback consistently and you do it well, they will have that by the end of the training course, and even on an assessment if they have to go back and do something again. Glad you discussed the good, bad, good. That's all right. Let's have a look. Okay, so on assessment, coaching to competence, should we be assessing and giving feedback, but ensuring they are competent without our coaching, then coaching to improve their competent performance? Yeah, so the question there is about, even on assessment, do we have any input? And what I've seen that's been really successful is right at the beginning of the course, somebody saying, I'm here to give you every opportunity to pass this. I need to see that you are competent. I need to see that you have the technical ability, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to have a discussion about, can I just give it another go? Or I understand what I did wrong. So we're not necessarily coaching them at that point to competence, but we are giving them room to explore what they've done wrong. Yeah, and that might be when you need to do the delivery with kindness, because that's the important point at the time point, that if you do a kind delivery of, look, you didn't get that quite right, we don't have time right now, but I want you to think about that, maybe go back to your notes, we can chat in the bus, and tomorrow I want to see you do it again, rather than, okay, you know that was wrong, we've got to get that right by the end of the week. I mean, that's true, but it's a huge amount of pressure to exert on someone, isn't it? So in short, we can't coach them technically on the assessment, but we can give them opportunities to demonstrate their competence, and perhaps give them some opportunity for small bits of feedback of, you're on the right lines, or I want you to go away and practice that, and I need to see it over the next few days.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
What else? A question about appointments. Okay, ask me a question about appointments.
I'd be concerned that if it's not the right time to give feedback, and you say, I want to speak to you later about this, that A, they might insist on dealing with it now, or B, worry or over worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good point, Andy. Yeah, thank you for that. And you're right. I think we have to think about the delivery of that information. So, for example, the way I might do it is say to someone, and again, I don't do training or assessment, but in other spheres where I need to talk to people about feedback, I might say, okay, I can see you're having a bit of difficulty with this, or it isn't quite what the criteria expects right now, but we can talk about this and make it right. And I've no doubt that we're going to get this sorted. Now's not the time to do it because I can see you're a bit ruffled and actually we're a bit short on time, or it's teeming down with rain or whatever. I want us to have a positive conversation about this later, because I know where we can make this right. And perhaps just allay that worry, because you're right, they will worry about it otherwise. It's like when somebody says, I'd like to see you later, and you think you're back at school outside the headmaster's office or headmistress's office, don't you? So yeah, just give them a little heads up. Don't want to get into it now, but we just need to talk between us about how we're going to fix this, because I think it is very fixable. Is that all right? Cool, great, thanks, Andy. Okay, other questions? I think it's great that we're increasingly focusing on candidates and assessors' soft skills. Okay, so I'm just going to be slightly pedantic there. We call them developmental skills now, because otherwise people are like, it's soft and therefore it's not important. But anyway, social and behavioural skills, that's right, rather than just the technical skills. New awards have helped with this. Yeah, absolutely. And that's important because we're breeding leaders. Yeah, we're not just marking people on their technical ability. Yeah. In the intro to the syllabus, is it good to provide an outline of how feedback will be delivered? Some fixed times and how and when? Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Just right at the beginning, I'm going to give you the opportunity to discuss with me at various points. Sometimes there might be situational things where we can't talk about it right there and then, maybe timing or weather or safety or needs of the rest of the group. But you should always feel that you get your questions answered, and that I am going to feedback to you consistently throughout the whole course. And sometimes it'll be group and sometimes it'll be individual. But yeah, set them up so they know what to expect. Managing expectations right at the beginning is absolutely crucial. And like I said, one of the best things I've seen is when people say right at the beginning, this is about me giving you every opportunity to show what you can do. And that immediately puts people at ease. You know, they know it's not just exam type conditions then. Okay, another question. What are your thoughts on feedback? Is just that feedback is neither positive nor negative. It's what you do with it that counts. Oh my gosh, you know me so well. Yes, it's your interpretation. So essentially we could be very kind of Nietzsche about this and say there is no such thing as positive and negative. It's just how you interpret it and how you deal with it. But under pressured situations, and training courses can feel very pressured for the candidates, I'm sure we all remember that. I remember the sweats, and they maybe don't quite have that level of liberality about their mind. So they're like, it is positive, it is negative. But we can still keep framing it in a way of, the things that I'm talking to you about are so that you can meet the criteria. And sometimes you'll get it right, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. Part of my job here is to coach you to getting it right. Okay. And maybe we just need to practice those conversations, because sometimes you just kind of can't quite help the look on your face. And so maybe we need to think about, oh, should I practice giving some bad news? Should I think about all the scenarios you've ever encountered? How did you deal with it then? And how would you deal with it now? So yeah, and some of the sort of examples here is what you do with feedback. You can ignore it, and that's very much the fixed mindset. And I make people aware of that. I'm like, look, I know that this isn't what you want to hear. We'll talk a little bit later about how we can interpret this differently. And maybe later, when we've got a cup of tea and I've soothed them a bit, we get the fixed mindset model out and I say, look, at the moment, there will be no improvement if you continue to ignore this. Those are the facts. They're undisputed. I want you to improve. I know you can improve, but you have to move beyond ignoring it. The second thing is storing it for later. Absolutely. And I think a lot of people do that automatically, don't they? Because they want to process it. I process very quickly, as you probably noticed, and that's why I ramble so much. But some people really need to go away and think about it. And some people might actually say, can I have a look at those notes you made? Maybe not all of them, but can I have a look at some of those notes so I can go away and think about it? And then the third thing is acting on it, possibly less helpful in an assessment where there are criteria involved. Yeah, so it's thinking about when is the time to deliver feedback. Now, if you give amazing feedback and help them set up that goal setting, which is our next webinar next week, so come back for more, bring the popcorn. If you deliver amazing feedback, if all of the training staff delivered amazing feedback and helped set up their candidates on a positive pathway, they would arrive at assessment in a better situation. They still might have nerves, they still might, make a few mess ups and get a bit worried and anxious, or maybe they're just not at the technical standard, but they will have a greater insight into what their competence level is. Okay, so here you mentioned that you cannot coach on assessment. Well, that's what I thought you heard you say. Yeah, I think so, but I might be able to backtrack on that depending on what you write next. If so, then I do not agree with this. I roll at the appropriate times to coach on assessment where relevant and depending on what level is required. Yes, that has to be a cutoff point. Yeah, and I think, yeah, you're right. I think if we're coaching them too much so that they should have been a defer, but now they're a pass, then that is not really an assessment, is it? And I think you're right. I think you are coaching them, you are giving them tips and skills. You're not just like, I can't say anything to you, don't look at me because I can't give anything away. But it's a difference. You're right. There's a line between how much do I coach and would they still be competent if I wasn't here now coaching them? Because that's the ultimate question, is it? Are you confident that they can demonstrate this criteria repeatedly and go away and be a good holder of that award? So there is an element of coaching throughout, because we're always learning, and maybe they just need some adjustment. Maybe there's some slight differences in how you approach things depending on who your trainer was and who your assessor is. So yes, I agree entirely. There is that level of coaching going on, but it's where you stop and say, if I wasn't coaching them right now, would they still pass this course? That kind of makes sense. Yeah, so somebody else has just written, you can coach on assessment, but not coaching to pass. If they don't learn anything, we've not done a good job. Yeah, you're right. So there's just got to be a balance around that. I generally think we could have a whole discussion about coaching on assessment, but yeah, you're right. And why not make them above and beyond the standard if you can? Yeah, absolutely. If we can coach them with extra things, if we are coaching to broaden their competence, that's great. That's a brilliant, that is you being a transformational and inspire leader. But if you are coaching them because they wouldn't pass otherwise, then I think there's a bit of a question around that. Hopefully is that a bit clearer? Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least 3 people are nodding, so that's good enough for me. Okay, positive outcome creates a growth mindset. Yeah, absolutely. Finding ways for them to practice and become competent at something small should lead to a better appreciation of practice. This, in theory, is one method to create a growth mindset through feedback. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you give them a positive experience, even if there have been some negative elements in it, even if they've got things wrong, if you can facilitate a positive experience, that will inspire them and motivate them to wanting to repeat those experiences. And that's how they gain mastery then, by having repeated experience that lead to a positive result or a positive feeling. Yeah, I like that. Really good. Thanks, Luke. Any other thoughts or anything? I've really enjoyed just talking for nearly an entire hour and hardly anybody's been able to interrupt me. This is the way I'm going to live my life from now on.
We'll see next time.
Yeah, exactly. Next time you're all going to fight for space. Okay, one more comment.
We'll get you next time.
If you agree with the above coaching points and assessment, just to add, I make a point of saying in the briefing that I may give some coaching if I think it would add to their experience. Perfectly put, just to help avoid them being thrown by feedback during an assessment. Yeah, absolutely, Carl. That's brilliant advice. And again, that's that managing expectations right at the beginning. I may well give you feedback. I may well give you some coaching tips because it will add value, not because it will make you pass. Yeah, perfect. It's also really helpful for homeschooling. Yeah, absolutely. The coaching, giving feedback, inspire, they all translate to parenting. Trust me. And in fact, interestingly, inspire was tested in a parent context, so it does apply absolutely. So make the most of it. Get your money's worth. If you're consistently inputting coaching on one or more element of the CEDAR model, then you are doing something for them. If you're supporting them with different bits of it and subsequently they are doing it alone, then you are not coaching to pass. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's adding value, broadening their toolbox, giving them extra elements to consider, basically going above and beyond, great, but not making them pass only because of the input that you've given them. Yeah, I'm hoping that we've got some clarity around that. I don't like to confuse people, but yeah, hopefully we're onto a winner there. All right, so any last questions then before you can go and rest your bleeding ears? If not, do email me during the week. We'll make sure that you get a copy of the presentation. Will be available to view again, and there will also be some more resources. I'm going to add another resource, Nick, so I'll send you something else, just a really nice picture diagram of CEDAR. And if you want anything else, I've got heaps of resources. I'm sure I could send you something. So
yeah, so my plan is to just edit the video this afternoon just so that it's ready to upload. So I don't have very fast internet here, so I'll upload it overnight. So by the morning, I should be able to add it to the website with the resources that Samantha was talking about, and then I'll email you the link. But they'll all be on that same page that the intro video was on. So if you've all seen that so far, then great, they'll be on that page. If not, I'll email everybody tomorrow afternoon.
Cool. And just one final word. I mean, how to get in my good books. Anything constructive to do before next week? You special people. Yeah, just have a look through the resources and come up with some questions, because I don't know everything. I know you might want to record that bit alone, but I don't know everything. And if we can raise some discussion, I want to make sure that you're able to test the limits of what we're discussing. So if you can find reasons to fault it or question what we're doing, then you come away more knowledgeable. So next week we'll be talking about goal setting. So we're actually going to look at ways of setting goals, the reason behind it, and I'd really like you to perhaps come up with some scenarios of times when you've experienced success and not success. So have a good think about things, and we'll have a good old really pleasant argument next week. That'd be great. Let's have a look. Any other things? Really useful. Great, thanks. Best webinar of COVID. Woo! Yeah, that's it. I could die happy now. I'm going to put that on my CV.
I certainly second that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. So stay safe, everybody, and enjoy racking your brains for examples.